President Joe Biden's nominee to be the next Health and Human Services Secretary, Xavier Becerra, not only has long supported abortion, but he's been an advocate for assisted suicide as well. Becerra, who served as California's Attorney General, was praised by assisted suicide advocates when he fought to preserve the state's End-of-Life Option Act. That law permits certain terminally ill adults in the state to request drugs used to end their life. Becerra, a Catholic, defended that law and said it provides some relief to patients, their families, and doctors. We reached out to the Catholic Medical Association for their reaction on Becerra's support for assisted suicide. CMA tells EWTN Pro-Life Weekly in part, quote, "If the United States Senate confirms the nomination of Mr. Xavier Becerra as Secretary of Health and Human Services, we can reasonably anticipate an unprecedented assault on the sanctity of human life and religious liberty. And this callous indifference to the sanctity of life is not limited to the beginning of life, as California Attorney General Mr. Becerra fought vigorously to defend the state's physician-assisted suicide law, the End-of-Life Option Act. It is frightening to consider that if confirmed, our next Secretary of Health and Human Services actually believes a physician's prescription for a lethal dose of medication will improve the efficiency of our system of healthcare and improve the lives of Americans." Our next guest, Stephanie Gray Connors, has a new book to help tackle this tough topic. Start with What? 10 Principles for Thinking About Assisted Suicide, draws on stories of people who have endured profound suffering and equips people to converse about assisted suicide with compassion, persuasion, and grace. The author of that book, Stephanie Gray Connors, joins us now on Skype. Stephanie, welcome back. Some viewers might remember you for that pro-life talk you gave at Google that went viral. Stephanie, when it comes to discussing and debating life issues, would you say assisted suicide is even more difficult to discuss than abortion? And why, Stephanie, did you ultimately want to release this book now?
Yeah, that's a great question. In some sense, I would say it is, because it seems easier to convince someone that it's wrong to end the life of another person who has not requested their death, which is the case for the preborn child. And when it comes to assisted suicide, people might say, but wait a minute, if it's my body, my life, and I want my life ended, then shouldn't I be allowed to do that? What impact does it have on you? But the point we as pro-lifers want to get across is no man is an island. We are impacted by the presence and the absence of other people, and we ought to treat each other as family, and family members work to preserve other people's lives, not support them when they feel despairing and want to end their lives.
HHS Secretary nominee Xavier Becerra has called California's assisted suicide law an important protection for families. Stephanie, what would you say are the biggest misconceptions when it comes to assisted suicide?
Well, that it solves a problem. You know, I often point out that we need to alleviate suffering without eliminating the sufferer. And assisted suicide doesn't alleviate suffering. The other point I would make is that we as humans are designed to love, both to be loved and to give love. But when someone opts for assisted suicide, they're eliminating the very life that is necessary to enter into a relationship of love. And if you look at Javier, you know, I think, well, what is the job of the Secretary of Health and Human Services? It's to support health and human services. And assisted suicide is the opposite of health, because rather than comforting and restoring someone's body to the state it should be in functioning well, it involves destroying the human person. And what is that which is inhumane? Things that are described as inhumane is like war and genocide, where innocent people are killed. And what is humane is when we preserve life. So we actually see assisted suicide as the most inhumane thing, because it is destroying another human person.
In your book, Start With What, you mentioned that society generally decries suicide, but will accept it when the word assisted is placed in front of it. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I think language is so important on this topic as it is with the abortion topic. And rather than use the term euthanasia, which can often confuse people, I find assisted suicide is powerful because suicide itself is what most, if not all people, instinctively are opposed to and saddened by. That's why when famous people like Robin Williams commit suicide, they grieve over that. And so when we refer to euthanasia as assisted suicide, we're trying to tap into people's instinctive reaction that to end one's life is a sign of someone who didn't have support or help, who was despairing, and that that's a tragedy to be avoided. But if that's true for suicide, then our point simply is throwing the word assisted in front of it shouldn't make a wrong thing suddenly become right. In fact, all the more, if we're assisting someone in ending their life, then we're feeding into the false narrative they have going on in their mind that their life isn't worth living. And we ought to be imparting that our fellow man and woman, they are lives that indeed are worth living and protecting.
Absolutely. You know, assisted suicide is really painted as the compassionate choice for those who advocate for it. I think because people see it as you've been talking about, an end to suffering. It's very difficult for us to wrap our heads around suffering. But, you know, Stephanie, we as Catholics, we do have a profound understanding of its purpose, don't we?
We do. And one of the things that I look to actually in my book is the insights of psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Dr. Viktor Frankl, who said that despair is suffering without meaning. And his whole point was that suffering is part of the human experience. We all have suffered and we all will suffer, but we don't have to despair in light of our suffering if we can find meaning in it. And so this perspective from a Jewish psychiatrist very much aligns with the Catholic perspective that we ought to seek and find meaning in whatever circumstance we're in, which is the idea behind the title, Start with What. It's to shift people away from the question, why am I suffering? Why is this terrible thing happen to me? And towards the question, what amazing, wonderful, incredible thing can I bring out of this terrible, horrible, awful thing? How can I find meaning in my circumstances?
For our viewers who do want to engage people on this topic of assisted suicide and they pick up your book, what is your #1 tip for how they can best do that and best converse on the topic of assisted suicide?
That's a great question. I would say to seek to understand, to remember the prayer of St. Francis, who said, "Oh, to my master, grant that I may not so much seek to be understood as to understand." And that means asking good questions, and I give examples of that in the book. And to also remember that when dialoguing with other people, we also, besides questions, want to impart stories that really move the heart and inspire people, which is why there's so many stories of people who face suffering but not given up on life. One such story, actually, Raymond Arroyo over there at EWTN has highlighted the incredible story of Maddie Stepanek, a little boy who died of muscular dystrophy, a very severe form of it. And I mention his story in my book, and his will to live is really inspiring to anyone who may be struggling. And so to be able to impart those inspiring examples, I think is huge in reaching people.
Absolutely. And I want to direct our viewers to find more information and to get Stephanie's book. You can go to loveunleasheslife.com. Stephanie Gray Connors, thank you so much and congratulations on the launch of this book.
Thank you.